Let's take a closer look at these shocking historical photos. Write in the comments which photo you like the most. In January 1987, a Chernobyl liquidator is examined inside the Specialist Radiation Unit of Moscow Hospital No. 6, where patients were treated in sterile, climate-controlled rooms. The photograph reveals the quiet medical response that continued long after the 1986 reactor disaster. On June 8, 1968, a family in Harmons, Maryland stood silently beside the tracks as Robert F. Kennedy's funeral train passed toward Washington. Thousands gathered along the route, turning the journey into a powerful national farewell seen from backyards, crossings, and small towns. On June 16 and 17, 1953, more than 1 million East Germans joined protests across roughly 700 towns, demanding better living conditions and an end to strict Soviet policies. Soviet troops and East German police crushed the uprising, and at least 55 people lost their lives. An Afghan Mujahideen fighter prepares a United States-supplied Stinger missile in Nangarhar province in 1988 during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Portable Stingers allowed small ground units to challenge Soviet aircraft, sharply increasing the danger of low-altitude missions. A 17-year-old vanished after leaving her late shift in Vermont on March 19, 2004. Her car was found backed into an abandoned farmhouse with her paycheck, bank card, glasses, and medication still inside, leaving investigators with a mystery that remains deeply unsettling. In 1975, Mao Zedong met George H.W. Bush in Beijing, when Bush served as the chief United States representative in China rather than as president. Henry Kissinger watched from behind them, capturing a rare moment in the slow diplomatic opening between Washington and Beijing. On July 16, 1950, Uruguay's winger scored the decisive goal against Brazil at the packed Maracana Stadium, turning a 1-0 deficit into a 2-1 victory. The result stunned the host nation and secured Uruguay's second World Cup title in one of football's greatest upsets. Eliza Sebastian became known for dramatic entrances and a fearless stage presence that made her impossible to ignore. She expressed her bold personality through brightly colored dresses and extravagant costumes, turning every appearance into a performance before the show had even begun. On May 17, 1987, USS Stark listed heavily in the Persian Gulf after 2 Exocet missiles struck the frigate during the Iran-Iraq War. Despite a major fire and severe damage, the crew kept the ship afloat, and it was later repaired and returned to active service. A Soviet T-34 tank rolls through East Berlin during the uprising of June 17, 1953. As workers and civilians protested higher production quotas and worsening living conditions. Soviet forces soon imposed martial law, turning a labor strike into the largest public revolt East Germany had yet seen. This reconstructed cell at Eastern State Penitentiary shows how Al Capone may have lived during his 1929 imprisonment in Philadelphia. Since no photographs of the original room are known, its furniture and decorations were recreated from newspaper descriptions of his unusually comfortable surroundings. During the 1995 Sanipa War, Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori visited troops near the disputed border with Ecuador, surrounded by soldiers and supply crates. The brief conflict ended after international mediation and led to a final peace agreement between the two countries in 1998. In this 1959 press portrait titled "Born to Write," Alice Denham pauses beside her typewriter with a cigarette in hand and pages spread across the desk. The carefully staged image transformed the quiet work of writing into a glamorous statement of confidence, ambition, and modern independence. In the 1986 World Cup quarterfinal, an Argentine attacker punched the ball past England's goalkeeper, and the goal was allowed to stand. It became known as the Hand of God, one of football's most famous and controversial moments, and helped send Argentina toward the title. Between 1931 and 1933, forced collectivization and livestock seizures devastated Kazakh communities across the Soviet Union. This rare surviving photograph of a mother and child reflects a catastrophe that took the lives of roughly 2 out of every 5 ethnic Kazakhs. On July 15, 1976, 26 schoolchildren and their bus driver were abducted near Chowchilla, California, and locked inside a buried moving trailer. After about 16 hours underground, the driver and older children forced open the roof, dug through the dirt, and led everyone to safety. On May 2, 1982, the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano began sinking after torpedoes from the British nuclear submarine Conqueror struck it during the Falklands War. The attack became one of the conflict's most disputed events and remains the only enemy warship sunk by a nuclear-powered submarine. On August 12, 1964, restaurant owner Lester Maddox struck a mannequin while protesting the new Civil Rights Act and integration. His highly publicized refusal to serve black customers made him a symbol of segregation and later helped propel him into the Georgia governor's office. At Louisiana's Angola Prison Farm in 1997, inmate George Crawford and other prisoners harvested crops by hand across the institution's vast fields. The scene reflects Angola's long system of prison labor, where incarcerated men worked agricultural jobs under close supervision. On July 14, 1944, American soldiers and sailors danced with French civilians in Cherbourg's Place de la République during the first Bastille Day after the city's liberation. The packed square became a rare moment of celebration only weeks after intense fighting across Normandy. At the Jinchi Temple complex in Shaanxi in 1908, several men rest beside opium pipes in a rare image of everyday life in late imperial China. The photograph was taken by Russian officer Karl Mannerheim while he secretly surveyed roads and political conditions during an ethnographic expedition. In the early 1960s, London landlord Peter Rachman became notorious for driving tenants from rent-controlled homes and replacing them with people who could be charged far more. His methods were so infamous that the word Rachmanism entered British English as a term for ruthless property exploitation. First Lieutenant Argonne Dixon, a 1943 West Point graduate, served with the 351st Infantry Regiment during the Allied campaign in Italy. He lost his life during heavy fighting in Tuscany on July 16, 1944, at only 23, and now rests at the Florence American Cemetery. During Pearl Jam's performance at the Pink Pop Festival on June 8, 1992, Eddie Vedder climbed high onto the stage scaffolding above a massive crowd. The fearless stunt became one of the most unforgettable images of the band's explosive early years. In 1916, Russian prima ballerina Anna Pavlova stepped behind the camera on the set of the silent film The Dumb Girl of Portici, in which she played the leading role. The rare photograph captures one of the world's most famous dancers experimenting with filmmaking during her only major screen appearance. On July 15, 1944, 3 American soldiers raised their glasses at a makeshift sidewalk cafe in recently captured La Haye-du-Puy, France. Sitting among shattered buildings and rubble, they created a brief moment of normal life during the Normandy campaign. On June 22, 1969, the polluted Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire when an oil-covered section ignited near a railroad bridge. Though the blaze lasted only about 30 minutes, it became a national symbol of industrial pollution and helped build support for stronger water protection laws. At Francisco Franco's funeral in Madrid in 1975, Chile's military ruler sat beside the Philippine First Lady among foreign dignitaries honoring Spain's longtime dictator. The carefully staged ceremony brought several of the 20th century's most controversial political figures into one frame. On the Eastern Front in 1942, a German soldier pauses beside a sign warning that this was an important supply road. Its slogan told drivers to treat the route with the same love as their sweetheart, turning basic road care into a personal military duty. Before the 1990 World Cup, Argentina's captain visited Jerusalem's Western Wall, placing a note between its ancient stones and pausing in prayer. The quiet moment sharply contrasted with the pressure awaiting one of football's most watched figures. On July 15, 1944, Chinese soldiers crossed the Salween River on a narrow temporary suspension bridge while carrying rifles and heavy packs. The original bridge had been destroyed by retreating Chinese forces 2 years earlier, leaving troops to rebuild this vital mountain route. In February 1945, 3 United States soldiers rested together in Dossenheim, France, as their units prepared to advance east into Germany. Their relaxed conversation captures a brief pause before the final and most dangerous months of the campaign in Europe. In 1980, members of an Asian American coalition protested outside a theater showing the fiendish plot of Dr. Fu Manchu, condemning its racist Chinese stereotypes. The film became its leading actor's final screen appearance and failed with both critics and audiences. In November 1940, a YMCA mobile canteen served hot drinks and simple meals to British soldiers stationed beside an anti-aircraft battery during the Blitz. While the guns fired into the dark sky, the small truck gave exhausted crews a few minutes of warmth, conversation, and ordinary life. At 1:30 in the morning on July 1, 1924, ground crews in Omaha unloaded United States airmail from the first westbound transcontinental mail plane. The night operation showed how aviation was beginning to transform coast-to-coast delivery once dominated by trains. Katsuyoshi Mikami, believed to be the last surviving pilot connected to the Zero Fighter's combat debut, passed away on July 2, 2026, at the age of 109. In 1940, he flew with the 12th Air Group during the aircraft's first major combat mission over Chongqing. After his wife died before reaching medical care, Dashrath Manji spent 22 years carving a road through a mountain in Bihar, using only a hammer and chisel. His hand-cut passage reduced the journey between nearby villages from about 55 kilometers to just 15. On April 11, 1944, deck crews aboard the United States escort carrier Altamaha rushed toward Avenger aircraft number 29 after a landing accident left it badly twisted on deck. The image shows how one failed approach could stop flight operations within seconds and place everyone nearby in danger. Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan lived quietly as a housewife in Queens until investigators exposed her past as a guard at Ravensbrück and Majdanek. In 1973, she became the first former Nazi camp guard extradited from the United States and was later sentenced to 2 life terms. In 1939, a monumental statue of Vladimir Lenin dominated the Yalta waterfront, its raised arm pointing across the Black Sea as residents gathered below. The photograph shows how Soviet political symbols stood at the center of everyday life, even in a peaceful seaside resort. On April 23, 1963, President John F. Kennedy paused during a White House speech when a 17-month-old girl began waving, chattering, and making faces nearby. Her unscripted performance stole the crowd's attention and left even the president watching with amusement. In 1916, German soldiers form a firing squad in the snow before a blindfolded Russian prisoner of war and a civilian. The stark photograph captures the brutality of the Eastern Front, where military occupation placed both soldiers and civilians in extreme danger. In 1975, 2 homeless men sit in a vacant lot beneath the newly completed World Trade Center, surrounded by rubble and discarded furniture. The striking contrast between the towers and their makeshift shelter captured the sharp divide between New York's rising wealth and those left outside it. One of the few known photographs of Kathleen Maddox, who gave birth to Charles Manson at 16 after a troubled youth in Appalachia. She later served time for an attempted robbery, while stories that she once traded her son for beer became part of the dark mythology surrounding his childhood. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York took 146 lives as crowds watched helplessly from the street below. The owners reportedly received about $445 in insurance for each worker lost, while many families were paid only around $75, deepening public outrage. On June 13, 2001, 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski left his Omaha home to meet a coworker at a nearby school, but never arrived. Cameras along the route captured nothing, and somewhere during an ordinary 8-block walk through his own neighborhood, he vanished without a trace. In December 1944, a paratrooper of the 1st Battalion, 1st Folgore Regiment, stands in the snow of Piedmont, Italy, carrying a Beretta Model 1938 submachine gun. His heavy coat, ammunition vest, and airborne badge reveal the equipment worn during the final winter of the war in Italy. On May 14, 1998, riot police confronted crowds in Jakarta as unrest spread during Indonesia's deep economic and political crisis. The turmoil shook the capital, and President Suharto resigned only 1 week later after more than 3 decades in power. At the Ulen Oud meat processing plant in the 1930s or 1940s, workers inspected long rows of sausages hanging inside a vast production hall. The crowded racks reveal the industrial scale of Soviet food processing, where thousands of products were prepared through tightly organized factory methods. On April 25, 1974, Portuguese soldiers arrest a fleeing member of the secret police on a Lisbon stairway during the Carnation Revolution. Within hours, the largely bloodless military uprising ended nearly 5 decades of dictatorship and began Portugal's transition to democracy. On February 22, 1941, German forces and Dutch collaborators surrounded Jewish men in Amsterdam and forced them to gather with their hands raised. The roundup became an early warning of the mass arrests, deportations, and persecution that would soon spread across the occupied Netherlands. During a 1965 visit to Poland, the Soviet leader posed in winter hunting gear with a scoped rifle, reflecting his well-known passion for hunting, firearms, and fast cars. Many citizens later remembered him as a ruler who enjoyed life personally and usually allowed others more room to enjoy theirs. Around 1870, a Sudanese woman posed for this rare studio portrait, wearing layered necklaces, bracelets, large earrings, and a nose ring that reflected wealth and identity. The image preserves an unusually detailed view of personal style in northeastern Africa during the 19th century. In 1910, nearly 100-year-old Marianne Elizabeth Faust reportedly walked to Knoxville and cooked Johnny cakes for the President of the United States, earning attention as one of America's oldest living citizens. 5 years later, she passed away almost unnoticed, without a single newspaper reporting her death. In late summer 1941, German bicycle troops move along a rural road on the Eastern Front, passing a Fiat SPA 38R truck and Italian soldiers resting in the grass. The scene captures the mixed Axis forces and improvised transport used during the invasion of the Soviet Union. In 1919, the steamer JS glowed beneath the moon while docked along the New Orleans waterfront, its decks lined with electric lights. Riverboats like this carried passengers and cargo across the Mississippi, turning the busy port into a gateway between the American South and the wider nation. On April 25, 1974, Captain Salguero Maya walked calmly toward Loyalist troops in Lisbon and urged them to join the uprising against Portugal's authoritarian regime. The confrontation became a defining image of the Carnation Revolution, which ended nearly 48 years of dictatorship. During Cold War exercises in the 1960s, Polish special forces from the 1st Assault Battalion disguised themselves as United States troops for infiltration training. They carried American weapons and used a Soviet GAZ-69 Jeep painted with United States Army markings to make the deception convincing. In 1997, 22-year-old Penha Goes was photographed in the Brazilian Amazon, wearing traditional facial markings connected to her indigenous community. Her direct gaze turned the portrait into a striking record of Amazonian identity at the end of the 20th century. In May 1997, Garry Kasparov sat stunned after IBM's Deep Blue defeated him in a 6-game rematch under standard tournament conditions. It was the first time a reigning world chess champion lost an entire match to a computer, marking a turning point in the history of artificial intelligence. On July 8, 1980, Michael Jackson and Freddie Mercury were photographed together backstage at the Los Angeles Forum, capturing two future music legends before their greatest fame. They later recorded several unfinished songs, creating one of pop history's most intriguing collaborations. In 1997, investigators rebuilt the central fuselage of TWA Flight 800 inside a hangar in Calverton, New York, to study how the Boeing 747 came apart. The huge reconstruction later trained new investigators and preserved key evidence from one of aviation history's most complex cases. In 1986, a teenage Ewan McGregor was photographed during his school years holding a French horn, long before he became an international film star. The image captures a quiet musical chapter in the life of the future actor, known for some of cinema's most memorable roles. During the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, England players relaxed at their Guadalajara hotel by smoking cigarettes and playing cards between matches. The casual scene feels almost impossible today when elite teams follow strict rules for fitness, recovery, diet, and public behavior. In 1910, two elderly brothers from West Virginia posed together in the uniforms they had worn on opposite sides of the American Civil War. Nearly 50 years after the conflict divided their loyalties, the rare portrait showed how the war could split even one family while leaving the bond between brothers intact. In the late 1980s, Ontario farm wife Vicky Kerr proudly holds the hand-cooked potato chips she began making in her kitchen under the name Miss Vicky's. Her small family business quickly grew into one of Canada's best-known snack brands while keeping its rustic image. Around 1875, a Brazilian woman posed for this rare cabinet card wearing a patterned head wrap and simple formal dress. Her steady gaze and the number written on her clothing preserve a powerful but mysterious glimpse of life in Brazil during the final years of slavery. In 1968, members of the worker-peasant propaganda teams at Tsinghua University celebrated mangoes presented by Mao Zedong while raising copies of the Little Red Book. The unfamiliar fruit became a political symbol, and replicas were displayed across China as proof of Mao's personal favor. On June 13, 1954, Jane Mansfield posed on her pink Jaguar XK-120 with young actors Lance Fuller, John Smith, Natalie Wood, and Robert Fuller. The staged publicity shot promoted all five as rising Hollywood stars and captured the glamour studios sold to post-war America. This 1941 Ustache police report records the forced deportation of 118 Jewish men, women, and children to the Jasenovac camp in the independent state of Croatia. Its cold bureaucratic language shows how human lives were reduced to numbers, transport orders, stamps, and signatures. In 1980, Pierce Brosnan married Australian actress Cassandra Harris and posed outside the ceremony with her two children beside them. Years before he became James Bond, the photograph captured the young family that would shape one of Hollywood's future leading men. On August 2, 1980, a powerful explosion destroyed part of Bologna Centrale Station, taking 85 lives in the deadliest terrorist attack in modern Italian history. The station clock remains frozen at 10:25, preserving the exact moment of the tragedy as a permanent memorial. On July 15, 1945, Avengers and Helldivers from USS Essex released bombs over Japan during major carrier strikes against the Tokyo region. They hit airfields, ships, rail lines, and factories as American naval air power reached the Japanese home islands in the final weeks of the war. In 1962, engineers tested this early lunar spacesuit prototype across the rocky Mojave Desert while preparing for NASA's Apollo program. Its bulky body, clear helmet, and portable life support system revealed how difficult simple movement could become on the moon. On July 16, 1946, a crowd gathered outside the United States Military Tribunal at Dachau as American authorities continued post-war trials of former camp personnel and other Nazi defendants. The site, once used for imprisonment, had become a courtroom where wartime crimes were examined and punished. Around 1945, a pilot, 2 aircrewmen, and one man's grandfather relax on a wooden bench at a wartime airfield, with rows of P-51 Mustangs behind them. Their easy smiles capture a rare pause from duty beside one of the most famous American fighters of the Second World War. In 1873, frontier legends Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody posed together in elaborate buckskin costumes while touring with the stage show Scouts of the Plains. The photograph helped transform 2 real Western figures into larger-than-life icons of the American frontier. In 1957, Sophia Loren posed on a Rome sidewalk with her mother, Romilda Villani, and younger sister, Maria Schiccolone, for a Life magazine feature. Their matching outfits created a playful family portrait as Loren's international film career was rapidly taking off. In 1990, Dubai was still a modest city, with only a handful of towers rising beside Sheikh Zayed Road and vast stretches of open desert beyond them. In just a few decades, the same empty landscape became one of the world's most recognizable skylines, filled with highways, luxury hotels, and record-breaking skyscrapers. On July 15, 1946, Karl Dönitz's lawyer argued at Nuremberg that German submarine warfare followed methods also used by the United States against Japan. Admiral Chester Nimitz's testimony weakened key charges, helping spare Dönitz from a far harsher sentence. In 1978, the singer was photographed inside a recording studio, wearing dark glasses and carefully monitoring her voice through oversized headphones. The intimate image captures the focused work behind the bold, polished sound that helped define the rising new wave era. This ornate Victorian morphine kit placed a glass drug vial and reusable metal syringe inside a velvet-lined case, making powerful pain relief seem elegant and routine. Easy access and weak regulation helped create widespread dependence during the late 19th century. During the Christmas truce of 1914, soldiers along parts of the Western Front left their trenches, exchanged small gifts, sang songs, and met in no man's land. Some groups also played informal football matches, creating a brief and extraordinary pause in the First World War. The Second Armstrong Whitworth AW-52 prototype tested a radical flying wing design, powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Derwent jet engines. Built after the Second World War, it explored whether an aircraft could fly efficiently without a traditional fuselage and tail. On July 15, 1937, the SS opened Buchenwald near Weimar, where prisoners were reduced to numbers and classified by badges during endless roll calls. First used mainly for political prisoners, the camp soon held Jews, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, and thousands of others. In 1975, ONA Flight 032 crashed during takeoff at New York's JFK Airport and immediately burst into flames, leaving only one usable exit. All 128 passengers escaped because they were trained flight attendants traveling together, turning a major disaster into an extraordinary survival story. Between the 1930s and 1950s, 3 Harvard football players posed in their locker room after a punishing game, still marked by bruises and torn uniforms. The sharply dressed visitor beside them creates a striking contrast between the rough sport and the formality of the era. On July 15, 1976, Vietnam veteran and anti-war activist Ron Kovich addressed the Democratic National Convention, calling for peace and better treatment of disabled veterans. His emotional appearance turned personal sacrifice into a powerful political message seen across America. In 1990, a colossal Lenin monument still dominated a hillside in Tajikistan, its outstretched arm looming above grazing animals and a foggy landscape. The surreal contrast captured the fading power of Soviet symbolism just 1 year before the USSR collapsed. On April 20, 1939, South African police landed in Windhoek during a coordinated operation that led to the arrest of 2,284 members of the banned Southwest African Nazi Party. Timed for Adolf Hitler's birthday, the raid became one of the largest pre-war crackdowns on Nazi activity in the region. In 1980, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat met Professor Menachem Milson during a historic period of dialogue between Egypt and Israel. Their meeting came only 1 year after the peace treaty that made Egypt the first Arab state to formally recognize Israel. In 1905, these glass negatives documented elaborate tattoos created by one of London's earliest professional tattoo artists. The detailed dragons and heraldic designs reveal how sophisticated body art had already become long before modern tattoo culture emerged. Around 1924, a vast crowd gathered beneath umbrellas outside Old Moster Church in Norway, one of the country's oldest stone churches. The rain-soaked scene captures a major public ceremony at a site closely connected to Norway's early Christian and political history. In 1945, President Harry S. Truman rode through the ruins of Berlin in an open military car surrounded by officers and security personnel. The shattered buildings around him revealed the immense destruction left across the German capital only weeks after the war in Europe ended. In 1925, longtime friends Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were photographed together in Dearborn, Michigan, after years of shared trips and experiments. Their remarkable friendship connected two inventors whose work reshaped transportation, electricity, and everyday life. In 1944, B-17G flying fortresses of the 490th Bombardment Group crossed Europe in a tight formation during a mission for the United States 8th Air Force. Their long vapor trails reveal the extreme altitude and enormous scale of the daylight bombing campaigns. In 1939, Robert Wadlow, the tallest man ever reliably recorded, towered above everyone around him at more than 8 feet tall. His extraordinary height came from a medical condition that caused continuous growth, making even ordinary public appearances unforgettable. After Hoover Dam was completed in 1935, water was released through its massive outlet works, sending a powerful surge into the canyon below. The dramatic scene revealed the enormous scale of the project and marked the moment engineers brought the Colorado River under controlled flow. In 1891, workers spent 13 days cutting down the 1,300-year-old Mark Twain tree, a giant sequoia nearly 5 meters wide. Its sections were displayed as curiosities, and the public outrage helped strengthen America's early movement to protect ancient forests. Around 1870, a Maori man in New Zealand posed for this striking portrait with traditional facial tomoko covering much of his face. These carefully carved patterns could express ancestry, status, and identity, preserving a powerful record of Maori culture during the colonial era. On February 28, 1929, a Yupik woman from Nunivak Island, Alaska, posed in layered bead necklaces, fur clothing, traditional facial markings, and delicate nose jewelry. The portrait preserves a vivid record of island identity and craftsmanship during a period of growing outside influence and rapid cultural change. On October 26, 1990, French soldiers in northern Saudi Arabia trained in full protective suits and gas masks as coalition forces prepared for the Gulf War. The eerie image reflects fears that Iraqi troops might use chemical agents, forcing soldiers to practice survival in the desert heat. In 1941, 2 Australian timber workers posed beside a log pile while shaving with freshly sharpened axes instead of razors. The staged wartime photograph turned their everyday tools into a striking display of confidence, precision, and rough bush humor. Around 1910, convicts and exiles were lined up under guard at a work camp along the Amur Railway in Russia's Far East. Thousands of prisoners helped build the remote route through harsh terrain, turning the railway into both an engineering project and a system of forced labor. During the height of Beatlemania, fans screamed, cried, and covered their ears as the band appeared before them. The reaction became so intense that concerts were often drowned out by the crowd, turning 4 young musicians into the center of a global cultural phenomenon. At the 1965 Iowa State Fair, a woman wearing hair rollers sits in the straw while carefully combing a prize cow before a livestock beauty contest. The hilarious contrast shows how seriously breeders prepared every detail, from polished coats and clean hooves to a perfectly styled tail. In 1987, fighters from Hezbollah Islami Khalis posed together in the mountains of Afghanistan during the war against Soviet forces. Their mixed clothing, traditional caps, and varied rifles show how local resistance groups combined regional identity with weapons gathered from many different sources. In 1958, photographer Cornel Capa captured ballerinas training at the Bolshoi Ballet School during his journey through the Soviet Union. This marked guide print shows the darkroom notes used to control exposure and carefully brighten or darken each part of the final image. On March 17, 1926, the League of Nations Assembly expressed regret that Germany's admission had been delayed by political disputes. Delegates hoped to settle the crisis before September, knowing the next 6 months could decide whether the League could truly preserve peace. In 1945, Red Army soldiers posed atop a fallen German eagle amid the ruins of Berlin, turning a shattered state emblem into a symbol of defeat. With damaged vehicles and rubble behind them, the photograph captured the collapse of the Third Reich in one unforgettable frame. On January 29, 1979, a senior commander from the Shah's secret police was pulled from his car and surrounded by an angry crowd in Tehran. The tense photograph captured how quickly state authority was collapsing as the Iranian Revolution moved toward its decisive final days. In April 1945, soldiers of the United States 14th Armored Division entered Stalag 13C near Hammelburg, Germany, freeing prisoners held behind barbed wire. Many men visible may have served in the Royal Yugoslav Army before their capture in 1941. During the 1920s, young Ivy League men turned oversized raccoon coats into one of the most recognizable symbols of campus wealth and status. Expensive, dramatic, and impossible to ignore, the coats became a fashionable way to display privilege during college life. In 1905, miners at Michigan's Tamarack copper shaft posed on a huge mound of waste rock, still holding the lunch pails they carried underground. The photograph reveals the scale of the industry and the exhausting daily labor performed by both adult men and teenage boys. In 1943, young Bevan boys descend into Markham Colliery after Britain sent thousands of conscripts into coal mines instead of the armed forces. Chosen largely by lottery, they did exhausting underground work that kept wartime factories, railways, and power stations running. In 1956, Syrian women stood in military formation with rifles, a rare sight in a region where female service was still highly unusual. Their disciplined posture preserves an overlooked chapter of Middle Eastern history and shows women entering roles long reserved for men. In 1961, a heavy rain and hailstorm flooded streets near the railway station in Voronezh, forcing residents to wade through deep water. While most saw only disruption, one barefoot passerby turned the temporary river into a rare moment of freedom and summer joy. This photograph, sometimes dated to the 1930s, shows a woman and child moving along a muddy mountain trail beneath enormous woven rain covers. The handmade shelters protected travelers from harsh weather and created the striking appearance of a walking line of baskets. In 1930s, Tehran, an Iranian mother and her young daughter paused together on a city street, dressed in strikingly different styles that reflect changing generations. Their quiet portrait preserves a rare glimpse of family life during a period of rapid political and social transformation in Iran. In 1969, the guitarist pressed his instrument against towering amplifiers while roadies struggled to hold them upright. The wild stunt created piercing feedback on purpose, turning noise, movement, and stage chaos into a dramatic part of the performance. In August 1945, 6 senior Japanese officers sat inside New Bilibid prison in the Philippines, reading American newspapers shortly after surrendering in northern Cebu. The quiet scene hid an uncertain future as they awaited interrogation, detention decisions, and possible trials for wartime crimes. In 1979, an Afghan mujahid posed with a Soviet PPSH-41 submachine gun only months before the Soviet intervention transformed the country. The aging World War II weapon shows how early resistance fighters relied on whatever rifles and equipment they could obtain. In 1951, women in New York protested the arrival of Soviet diplomat Andrei Gromyko, holding signs against communism, forced deportations in Hungary, and political repression. Their furious slogans reveal how deeply fear of Soviet influence shaped public life during the early Cold War. In August 1943, partisan scout Daria Voitenko milks a cow at a hidden forest camp near Krymok in the Ukrainian SSR. The quiet task shows how resistance units survived between missions, relying on livestock, local supplies, and improvised routines far from regular army bases. In 1945, American infantrymen in Italy placed letters, photographs, and other personal items into a wooden crate before a night raid on German positions. Only identification tags were allowed, reducing the chance that captured documents could reveal names, units, or details about their mission. Katharina Brumbach, known on stage as Sandwina, became famous for lifting grown men and even defeating strongman Eugen Sandow in a weightlifting contest. She later used her fame to support women's rights and health while casually turning her husband and child into part of the act. Around 1917, a German soldier posed in a trench with several steel hand granaten secured across his belt for quick access. The distinctive wooden handles made these grenades easy to carry and throw, becoming one of the most recognizable weapons of the First World War. On September 5, 1942, the British hospital ship HMHS Somersetshire entered dry dock at Alexandria after a torpedo from German submarine U-453 tore open her hull. Workers repaired the massive damage, allowing the ship to return to medical service later in the war. In September 1917, Boy Scouts demonstrated several types of gas masks as civilians learned how modern warfare had changed personal safety. The strange hoods and respirators show how chemical attacks forced even youth groups to practice emergency protection during the First World War. During the 1930s, Meyer Lansky and other Jewish gangsters organized groups that disrupted German-American Bund rallies across New York. Long before the United States entered the war, they tried to make open support for Hitler dangerous and unwelcome in the city. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?